Hello, and welcome back to the reading of White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide by Carol Anderson. If you've been reading along, we are on Chapter 2 still, Derailing the Great Migration. When we last left off, we were talking about an incident that happened at a Mr. Sweet's house, a Dr. Sweet's house, where he had moved into a predominantly white neighborhood, and authorities and the neighbors were doing their best to get rid of him. If you have been reading along, we're on page 60, the third paragraph. Let's go ahead and jump right in. A reporter from the Detroit Free Press, who trudged through the rocks and debris at the Sweets home, listened to Shucknet repeat the tale of neighbors walking the streets on a warm summer evening, and then add a tantalizing new piece of information. When the officer and his men searched the home on Garland, they found nothing less than a full-blown arsenal: rifles, handguns, and hundreds of rounds of ammunition when the place was barely furnished. The implication was clear. This was not a home where people intended on living. It was, instead, a sniper's nest from which bullets were sprayed into a peaceful, calm neighborhood, killing a husband and father while sending another man to the hospital. Shuknecht's story was explosive, and the Detroit Free Press ran with it, and was quickly followed by its rival paper, the Detroit Times. A reporter for a third newspaper in town, the Detroit News, had also been there that night. A nigger family has moved in the neighborhood, and they're going to pit them out, Philip Adler heard a woman say. As he worked his way through the throng, Adler saw the rocks rain down on the Sweets home, and then he heard the shots. Contrary to Shucknecht's account, Adler saw the Sweets had been under an unrelenting attack, while the police stood by and did nothing meaningful to stop it. However, Adler's editor refused to run his story and instead reiterated Shucknecht's version. By evening, Detroit's three newspapers had 500,000 copies blanketing the city, each of them condemning the Sweets as killers. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Since the war, Detroit had become Klan country, 35,000 members strong. Thus far, a coalition of white, ethnics, and blacks arrayed around the slogan, "Keep Detroit an American City," had managed to beat back the Klan's challenge for the mayor's office. Now, Mayor Johnny Smith, who had helped wield that coalition and whom blacks had come to view as an ally, sucker punched his African-American constituency in an open letter to the police commissioner. He saw the KKK's hand behind the outrage on Garland Avenue, which, given the violence that rained down on the Sweets, initially made sense. But as Smith unveiled his logic, it was not the mob that incurred his wrath, but the Sweets, who had the temerity to move into a white neighborhood. The Klan, he railed, had worked overtime to induce Negroes to go into districts populated entirely by persons who would resent such an invasion. The point of such an incursion, he asserted, was to spark a race war that would blow Detroit apart and deliver the city to the KKK. Unfortunately, the mayor continued, the Ossian Sweets of this world had been willing pawns in this power play. If the Negro would just stay in his place, he wrote, and quit demanding to exercise every last little right which the law gives him, quote, then there would be peace in Detroit. Like, shut up and dribble. I shall go further, Smith then added. I believe that any colored person who endangers life and property simply to gratify his personal pride is an enemy of his race as well as an inscient of a riot and murder. I believe that any colored person who endangers life and property simply to gratify his personal pride. They're describing life and property as prideful things. Even for Detroit's liberal mayor, peace was based on Black people quietly and gracefully accepting the fact that they had no right to their rights. As he read the police reports, the interrogation transcripts, and the newspaper accounts of what happened that evening on Garland Avenue, Wayne County Prosecutor Robert Toms would go on to be tapped as a judge to oversee the Nazi war crimes trials at Nuremberg, spotted an obvious weakness in his case. All those arrested, despite the fact that their stories rippled with inconsistencies, agreed that the house was under attack, that rocks were, quote, pouring in like rain, end quote, and that a bloodthirsty mob had descended on the Sweets. By any measure, that established self-defense. But Toms remained determined to, quote, to bring those 11 Negroes to trial. Tom sent his assistant prosecutor, Ted Kennedy, out to conduct additional interviews with the police and neighbors to shore up the case against Sweet and his friends. 2 key points needed to be nailed down: the size of the crowd and the time when the rocks were first thrown. Michigan law defined a mob as more than 12 armed people or 30 unarmed assembled to intimidate or inflict harm, which meant causing $25 in damage to a piece of property. It wasn't just the Sweets who insisted there was a mob. The very newspapers that had branded them as killers described hundreds of people swarming Garland Avenue. Schuchnet's version, though, had to be supported, and Kennedy's job was to nail down the police inspector's story and then get independent corroborating testimony. After just a few questions, it was clear to him that the case rested on quicksand. The assistant prosecutor strongly suggested that Schuchnet's answers were rehearsed, informed not by the truth, but by a quick glance at Michigan law books. But Kennedy had a job to do, and as he turned to the next-door neighbors, the tone of his questions, along with his body language, helped steer them to the right answers. Those corroborating statements, buttressing an avalanche of police evidence, convinced Toms to proceed. He would, as well, ensure that the Sweets would face an all-white jury. And if he couldn't convince 12 Caucasians to convict 11 Negroes who invaded a white neighborhood armed to the teeth, well, then he didn't deserve his salary. He'd already seen to it that the Sweets were denied bail and would have to languish in jail until the jury decided their fate months later. As the trial began, Toms described the empty rooms contrasted with the full supply of weapons, driving home the point that the defendants agreed to a preconceived conspiracy to murder, which, plotting by the people holed up in the house on Garland, he explained to the jury, was evident from the results of the interrogations. At the police station, Kennedy had kept after Dr. Sweet about the guns. When had they arrived? Why were weapons in the house? And who had brought them? Sweet dodged and dodged, but the assistant prosecutor was relentless. When you moved in, you had the arsenal up there with you, knowing you were going to have trouble, didn't you? Yes, the doctor finally said. If Sweet knew there was going to be trouble, Kennedy probed, why did you move in there then? Sweet's response? Because I bought the house, and it was my house, and I felt I had a right to live in it. Carried no weight. Blacks had no property rights in white neighborhoods. Henry Sweet eventually admitted that he had fired a rifle, but only after the rocks began coming in on me. Kennedy was unimpressed. Did any of them hit you? If you stayed out of the front room, you wouldn't have been hit, would you? Toms summed up his case at the end of the trial. The invasion of a white neighborhood, the arsenal in a sparsely furnished house, the admission that shots had rung out from the upstairs window, it all meant only one thing. Leon Briner was shot through the back from ambush. And as a prosecutor told the jury, you can't make anything out of those facts but cold-blooded murder. Watching the Sweet case unfold, Walter White, Assistant Secretary of the NAACP, immediately recognized that if the ancient Anglo-Saxon principle that a man's home is his castle were not made applicable to Negroes, we knew that other and even more determined attacks would be made upon the homes of Negroes throughout the country. The association declared that if Black people in Detroit couldn't protect their home from a white mob, then no Black person anywhere in America was safe. The NAACP had therefore rushed to pull together a legal team to help the Sweets, including famed attorney Clarence Darrow, for whom this case was about a sacred ancient right, that of protection of home and life. And as David Lilienthal wrote in The Nation, the question was, did Negroes have the same right of self-defense as white people? Patiently and meticulously, Darrow and his co-counsel Arthur Garfield Hayes picked apart the lies, the coached testimony, and the half-truths of the neighbors, homeowners, association leaders, and police. The size of the crowd inched well above Schuchnet's 12. The rocks were acknowledged as a hailstorm. And eventually, a homeowners association discussion concerning property values was revealed to have been about the level of violence necessary to oust the Sweets. During closing arguments, Darrow explained for the jurors' benefit that the prosecution's case was based on racism and lies. Every one of them, the prosecution's witnesses, perjured themselves over and over and over and over again to send 11 Black people to prison for life. What was more, he added, they had perjured themselves on behalf of what they think is their noble Nordic race. Acquit my clients, he insisted, and repair the damage caused by America's shameful original sin. Several days of deliberations later, Darrow did not get what he wanted, but neither did Tom's. 5 jurors voted for acquittal. 7, however, repeatedly voted to convict Ossian and Henry Sweet for murder. It was then a hung jury. Yet, despite the fact that Darrow had exposed the perjured testimony and legal weaknesses in the case, Tom's refused to drop the charges. And so there was a second trial at which Henry Sweet, an admitted shooter, was the first to be tried. Darrow was more than ready. This time he suspected that the lying would be all the more obvious, and with many of the prosecution witnesses having forgotten the testimony that they gave at their first trial. Even the press, taking notice of their irregularities, had begun to tone down its polemics. Having already managed to establish that so many cars had been in the area that night that the police had had to barricade the street, Darrow explained to the jurors, there is nothing but prejudice in this case. If it was reversed and 11 white men had shot and killed a Black while protecting their home and their lives against a mob of Blacks, nobody would have dreamed of having them indicted. They would have been given medals instead. With each crack in witnesses' testimony, Tom's case fell apart. By the time of his closing statement, therefore, he was reduced to arguing that even if there were 500 people out that night, Michigan law might call that a mob, but the doctor and his friends had no right to do so. Tom's went on to argue that prejudice and intolerance had nothing to do with this case. Nevertheless, he said it wasn't unreasonable for the community association to want to maintain the racial purity of their neighborhood. Tom's continued to minimize what a rock-throwing mob converging on the house at Garland Avenue actually meant to those trapped in the home. Even though the prosecution's own witnesses, under intense cross-examination, admitted to stones having positively pounded the bungalow, Tom's remarked that it couldn't have been that intense because only 2 panes of glass had broken. The only thing that mattered was that Leon Briner, a white man, was now dead. And Tom's, as he continued his closing arguments, wanted the all-white jury to understand why. The killing of that family man happened because the Sweets and their families were uppity. They murdered Briner just to impress on the right people that they didn't propose to be driven out. Sweet thought that he had the right to live wherever he wanted to live by any means he chose to adopt. It was not fear that led Henry Sweet to pull the trigger, Tom stated by way of conclusion. It was hate. It was arrogance. Briner was sacrificed on the altar of Henry Sweet's rights and privileges. This time, though, the jury didn't buy Tom's argument, and the foreman pronounced Henry Sweet not guilty. The costs of this legal victory, however, were painfully, staggeringly high. Gladys Sweet, the doctor's wife, who had been cooking dinner when the rocks and bullets started flying, contracted tuberculosis while being held for nearly a month in the dank, crowded, and unsanitary jail. Their baby daughter had also become infected, as did Henry. All of them died. Ossian Sweet, who had fought so hard, tried to soldier on, but eventually he faced foreclosure, had to sell the home on Garland Avenue, and was forced to move to a small apartment in Black Bottom. He put a gun to his head one night and pulled the trigger. That's the end of chapter 2. That's the end of chapter 2, Derailing the Great Migration. And we'll come back to chapter 3, and I want to talk about chapter 2. And it's funny how sometimes where we're at with this type of learning and education can mirror what's happening in real life. And it strikes me that where we picked up today is really speaking to the Sweets fighting back against the mob of white people for defending a place that's theirs, defending their home. And it's going to be a loose connection, but follow me here. You have Dr. Sweet, who has moved into his home. He's purchased his home. This home is his. It's his property now. He lives there now. And because people who also occupied property in that area. So we'll call Detroit, that neighborhood in Detroit, we'll call it the land. And Dr. Sweet and his family owned a portion of that land. Also on that land were the majority of white people. And they felt that the Sweets did not belong on that portion of that entire strip of land. The loose connection that I'm making here is Palestinians and Israelis, excuse me. You have that entire strip of land. You have the Palestinians. This is their home. This is their home. This is where they live. This is where they're indigenous to. And you've got Israel that wants them out and is doing everything they can to get them out, even though it's their land. And Israel has been working at a genocide for years, for decades, and doing everything they can in their power to eliminate the Palestinians. And when the Palestinians, a portion of the Palestinians, a group that was elected by Israel, has decided enough is enough, and they decide to fight back to protect their land, now Israel is calling themselves the victim. I've been struggling with this. We're going to go a little off topic here, but it's on topic. I've been struggling with finding a way to understand where we're at in this world. I don't know how we go forward from here. We're watching a mass genocide. And the reason why I'm struggling is because this is not the first genocide that has happened. This is not the first time this has happened. This is not the first time that's happened in Palestine with Palestine and Israel. This has been going on since 1948. Roughly 1948. Please don't quote me on that year. But this has been going on. This has been happening. This is nothing new. And as a Black woman, knowing that the history behind these attempts at genocide, it has been overwhelming. It's been overwhelming. It's been overwhelming because now we're seeing it. We're seeing it so much more. We're seeing history again continue itself. What I just described, it's a loose comparison, but it's the same situation. We have people that own this place where they live, that they rightfully own it. And because somebody else feels that they don't belong there, they're doing everything in their power to get rid of them to the point of a murder. All because they don't feel like somebody else belongs there, to a place that's theirs, that is theirs. And this is what we see. This is what we're living. We are living in a true genocide. We're living in a genocidal world right now, where if you have a group of people that does not believe another group of people should exist, they will do everything in their power to get rid of them. We see this with Black people, with Indigenous people, with Asian people, with queer people, with trans people, with disabled people. Right now, if you are not a cishet, white, wealthy man, it is hard to believe that you have a place in this world, knowing that you do. And, we can tell these stories, we can read these stories, we can talk about it, and we need to talk about it, and we need to keep learning about it. This book is so important right now. Reading authors, reading about what's going on in Palestine is so important right now. Reading the history of Palestine and Israel and the conflict there, that's so important. We need to be educated on it. And I know it can be overwhelming, and I know it can be exhausting. And there's been a conversation that has been going on. We are going, I don't want to say off topic, but we're talking a draft. I know there's been conversations about making sure that you're taking care of your mental health. And that is absolutely true. That is absolutely true, to make sure that your mental health is okay. I am going to encourage and invite and strongly suggest to people to understand that taking care of your mental health can look a lot of different ways, and that does not have to negate the fact that you are doing everything you can to uplift the voices of the people that need to be heard right now. You can take care of your mental health without digesting those horrific and violent images. You can uplift the voices of other people without exposing yourself to those. There are content creators, there are educators, like I mentioned, there are books that you can read. You can talk about this. There are apps that you can call your representatives to say, let's stop funding this fucking war. Because this country that we live in, if you're in the United States, are not only supporting these genocidal acts, but we're funding it. So there are ways that you can participate, and there are ways that you can activate. There are ways that you can support that still keep you safe, that keep your mental health safe. I want people to recognize that they do not have to immerse themselves in the violent visuals as a way of supporting a marginalized community. It goes along with the same concept where we've talked before, if you're with me on any other social media platform, that you don't have to try and relate to what somebody is going through as part of your support for them, or as part as your uplifting, or as part as of being an advocate for them. You do not have to relate to what they're going through. These are those moments where you can have compassion for what people are going through. You can have compassion, and you do what you can to remove that harm for them. If you are a non-white person, I don't want to say non-white person, if you are not a cishet white wealthy man, then at some point you have found yourself in a position where the world has considered you less than. If you're a woman, if you're Black, Indigenous, another person of the global majority, disabled, queer, on and on and on. Again, if you are not a cisgender, heterosexual, white, wealthy man, the world has at some point made you feel like you are not worthy of being here, which means that you have the recognition of being ostracized and being considered not worth being here. So when you have that, that is that slice of empathy that people also try to look for. You have that piece of empathy. You can recognize, while it may not be on the same scale, yes, we can recognize that the bombings that are happening in Palestine are not quite the same as legislation here in the States. That does not make it any less intense when we think about the fact that the legislation here in the States is what's killing people here today. But it gives you that empathy, and that compassion combined is what allows you to be an advocate. It's what allows you to do what is necessary to get these voices out here, to understand and to just explain and shout out that we do not need to be in war. We do not need to continue this war. We do not need to eradicate any human being. There's absolutely no need for that. And it sounds lofty, and it sounds naive, and it sounds but everybody should belong. But everybody should fucking belong. There is room for everybody here. And it sounds so trivial, and it sounds so juvenile, but there is room for everybody here. And at the end of the day, nobody should get to decide who is worth more than somebody else. That should not be a decision that anybody else is making. I want people to just really sit with what this world is looking like right now. Excuse me. I want people to think about the fact that the majority of us are hopeless or feeling hopeless. I want people to think about what is happening today. What is happening today is inching us closer and closer to a place that we cannot come back from. And we've been heading that way. If we go back to the history of this book, when we're talking about the emancipation of enslaved African Americans, there was no going back from that. We're still trying to recover or establish something from this. And we keep adding onto it. And it seems so hopeless, but somehow we're still here. We're still here. And if you're with me here, then you've recognized that even in these moments where we feel hopeless, even in these moments where we just feel overwhelmed, we can still do something. We can still do something. There are many ways to have your voice heard or to uplift the voices of people around you. Journal prompt for this reading. I want you to think about ways that you can make your voice heard. I want you to think about ways that you're taking your activism and your advocacy offline. We're doing so much work here, and I'm so proud of you. What are you doing offline? And a little bit of homework. There is an app called 5 Numbers that you can download to contact your representatives to say, stop funding this fucking war. I'm proud of y'all. Make sure to stay hydrated. And we will pick up with chapter 3 next week. Take care of yourselves.